that area, because that's a major area of industrialization. And we all know, of course, that without electricity, industries cannot do so much. And also that for you to have the ease of doing business, there must be power supply, energy supply. But as we have heard from President Mahama, there are challenges, but there are also ways forward. And on this note, I would like to invite to the podium scholar, author, distinguished Nigerian citizen. He alone has 2-3 national honors, when some of us have not even been given one. Professor Barth, Nnaji.
Thank you so much, Chief Dr. Reuben Abati. You are just exactly who you are. An encyclopedia of a lot of things about the nation and the world. Thank you so much. Your Excellency, the Chairman of the occasion, John Dramani Mahama, I understand that you're also a newly crowned chief in our country, so congratulations, former President of Ghana. Your Excellency, Chief Ademola Adeleke, Governor of Osun State and Chief Host. Your Excellency, Mr. Peter Obi, Your Excellency, Senator Kwankwaso, Your Excellency, Donald Duke, very distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to plead your indulgence to rest on an already established protocol, as we say here in Nigeria. So I, just like the President and Chairman said, I don't want to fall into the trap of having to miss so many people, because it is totally possible considering the number of very distinguished people here. Let me first start by congratulating Are Dele Momodu, Chairman of Ovation Group, for joining us. Actually, he said that he joined us 4 years ago on the 6th floor. Though you have many years yet on this floor, you have managed to pack so many accomplishments on your journey up to the various floors to this one. So your friends, family, and I are wishing a life of happiness, prosperity, and good health to you as you climb to the rest of the floors that the Almighty may grant you. I also want to thank you so much for asking me to do this, the very first, this lecture series. And what you said is so apt, because we need to begin to really get into our minds about solving our problems. And the topic chosen must be appropriate, something that really goes to the heart of the matter. And I believe you've chosen right in terms of the topic. Dele, you have been a man of great character, not prone to bend to the whims and caprices of our nation's powers. I recall how you gallantly chose me as your 2012 Man of the Year, even though I had resigned as Minister of Power the previous August. You asked the then Governor of Rivers State, Right Honorable Rotimi Amechi, to come all the way from Port Harcourt to make the presentation to me in early 2013. such act stands you out as someone who looks beyond the chatter of our impious politics in whatever you do. God bless you. I like to think, and I think all of us were here listening to President Mahama, I think that it is important for someone who occupies the sort of position that he has occupied and seeks to occupy to have good mastery of statistics and knowledge of what the subject is about. He has been able to tell us a lot about the value chain of energy. He's also been able to link it with politics and the economics. We thank you very much, sir. In fact, you've made my job easier because Dele chose for me to talk about politics of energy. So I will go straight to the politics of energy and not have to address all these wonderful issues that you've covered. Thank you. The modern global economy runs on energy. That's very clear. Contemporary geopolitics are shaped by energy. For instance, it is wondered whether the United States of America would have risked the lives of thousands of its troops and spent so much financial resources on rescuing Kuwait from the vice grip of the then Iraqi president, Saddam Hussein, if the little desert nation with sparse population had not been full of petroleum. The speculation is important because when Saddam Hussein moved into Kuwait on 8 August 1989 and occupied it, which caused pandemonium throughout the globe, Liberia was about to start a descent into anarchy. Liberia is not just another country. It was an American colony created for freed African slaves. Its capital, Monrovia, is named after the 5th American president, James Monroe, who was president of America from 1817 to 1825, widely remembered for the Monroe Doctrine that the American hemisphere should be treated as the American backyard. The doctrine precludes outsiders from meddling in affairs around the United States. Yet, Washington ignored the chaos and anarchy in Liberia that started on December 24, 1989, when Charles Taylor led the National Patriotic Front of Liberia to launch a war from Nimba County that shares border with the Ivory Coast. Nigeria was compelled, as the giant of Africa, to not only move Army, Navy, and Air Force into Liberia, but also spend a fortune in the country under the auspices of Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS. I understand that at the end of the war, Nigeria lost about 1,000 officers and soldiers, that is, a whole battalion, and also spent some $8 billion on the ECOMOG operation. Now, let us move away from events of the 1990s and the wars. Let us reflect on the international events of the last couple of years concerning energy. The West, particularly Western Europe, has been mounting a relentless campaign for cleaner energy. It wants the world to embrace solar, wind, and other forms of renewable energy, like hydropower. It has been asking mostly developing countries to abandon coal in particular, referring to it as the greatest environmental pollutant through carbon emission. It has even added natural gas to the list. So when Mr. President was talking about natural gas and the plan of his government, should he win, to focus also on natural gas, just to know that these people have added natural gas as a major pollutant. So it has added natural gas, all in an effort to make the world limit global warming to 1.5 degrees centigrade by 2030, as required by the Paris Accord on Climate Change of 2015. Something dramatic was to happen in 2022. Following Russia's invasion of Ukraine, European nations imposed a series of sanctions on Russia. Moscow, in return, took punitive actions against the West. Western countries like Germany, which depended largely on gas exports from Russia, began to feel the pinch. Germany, the largest European economy, decided to revive, would you believe it, coal-fired plants that it had resolved under Angela Merkel to close down. Though there was no imminent threat to power shortage in Germany, Berlin chose to reverse its policy on coal plants rather than risk in any way the chance of its people suffering any form of electricity crisis. Germany was not alone. The United Kingdom, which had prided itself on shutting down its coal-fired plants and on building large wind farms, decided to resuscitate its coal plants. Why? It didn't want its citizens to suffer the 2022 heat wave unduly. A similar scenario emerged in France the same year. Faced with winter, which could hurt its people, Paris chose to extend the lifespans of its coal-fired plants. Though electricity from coal was responsible for only about 0.6% of national electricity in France, the French government had to extend the lifespans of coal-fired plants just to protect its people. This is the country where 196 countries, including the Vatican City, signed the famous Paris Accord on Climate Change under the United Nations auspices. The United States is proud that several of its coal-fired plants have been decommissioned. Coal used to account for 50% of America's electricity, but the figure has now reduced to about 17.8%, and it is expected that it may decline to 4% by 2030. Environmentalists are delighted at the rapid decline, but it would appear that decline has not been driven by as much commitment to environmental protection as by economics. Even though the Joe Biden administration has a special envoy on climate change, it is easier and cheaper to run a natural gas-fired plant than a coal-fired one. As a fact, in fact, a coal-fired plant, let's use Nigeria, would cost you anywhere from a gas-fired will cost you anywhere from $1.3 to $1.5 million to install 1 megawatt. But coal-fired would cost you at least $2 million. So, but that's not quite the issue. The issue is about availability of the fuel. Now, it is easier, as I said, to run a natural gas-fired plant than coal one, thanks to enhanced shale gas production in the United States. In fact, fossil fuels make up 60% of the total fuel to power in America, since gas contributes more than 42% of the fuel to power in America. So, decommissioning the coal-fired plants, yes, but then there's another fossil fuel that's taking its place. The Donald Trump administration used to celebrate the ubiquity of coal all over the United States. Its availability, the convenience of its storage and use, the case of its transportation, the generous use by steel, aluminum, and the cement manufacturers, its extensive use by railway firms, the millions of American workers who depended on it, its host communities, several American businesses that relied on it, directly and indirectly, and its key role in American industrial history. You trust that Mr. Trump will talk in this way about such a product. There is something that we should know about the Americans as they deactivate their coal plants, a great concern for the common good. The United States Department of Energy has been looking for ways to fill the gap created by the declining coal plants. It thinks that converting the coal plants to nuclear plants will result in additional $275 million in the communities annually. That is, communities that hosted the coal-fired plants being decommissioned. So it wants the affected coal plants replaced by nuclear power plants. This is to ensure that the electricity workers retain their jobs and that the host communities remain economically active. There is the argument that repurposing the plants from coal-fired to nuclear will reduce the cost of building brand new stations by 30%. A nuclear plant requires a fraction of the fuel required by, say, a coal-fired plant to produce the same amount of power. But its wastewater is dangerous. And the primary raw material used for nuclear energy is uranium, which is mined and therefore constitutes environmental degradation. Of course, it is not only nations that have displayed self-interest in the dialogue over fossil fuels. Take the case of the 5 superstar oil and gas companies: Shell, ExxonMobil, Total Energies, Chevron, and British Petroleum. Well, actually, ExxonMobil and Chevron did not claim to be as committed to cleaner energy as their European counterparts. Shell, under Ben Van Beurden leadership, tried to sell itself as a leader in the vanguard of the campaign for clean energy and paid a price for it. While it was posting huge profits, its stock performance on the exchanges was flat. Unlike those of Chevron and ExxonMobil, investors were not sure whether Shell was an oil and gas firm or one dealing in renewables. All this changed with the assumption of office of Wael Sewan, the Lebanese Canadian, as its chief executive officer in January of 2023. Sewan has left no one in doubt that his loyalty is not to environmentalists, but to shareholders. Shell has resumed heavy investments in oil and gas. It has reduced its climate ambitions by scaling down its goal of reducing the net carbon intensity of its energy products from 20% to 15% by 2030. Its investments in renewables came down from $3.5 billion in 2022 to $2.5 billion in same year, in 2023. Shell is not alone. The other British superstar petroleum company, BP, has taken similar steps. Its investment in low-carbon energy are 7 times less than its investments in fossil fuel, while those of Shell are 5 times lower. Total Energies of France in April 2023 announced a reduction of its climate ambitions from 35 to 40% in emissions in 2030 to 20 to 30% is a range in the same period. The Shell CEO has an interesting explanation for the new ongoing huge investment in oil and gas by the petroleum majors. That is, the world needs energy security. I believe what he is really saying is that the Western nations need energy security. And so you're on your own in how you achieve what they want, but they're going to do what they want to ensure that they have energy security. Now, renewable energy has been marketed as the silver bullet to climate change. Many are therefore under the impression that there are no environmental issues with electric vehicles, solar panels, solar batteries, wind farms, dams, etc. They are in error, actually. Electric vehicles, for instance, are expensive to begin with. So Tesla vehicles price range from $40,000 to $47,000. Though Elon Musk has been rattled by cheaper electric vehicles from China, like those from BYD, and is therefore working very hard to produce more affordable vehicles. This thing has happened in America in the past in terms of when they began to talk about emissions. So the Japanese were producing cheaper vehicles and also better emitting, carbon emitting vehicles. And Americans had to go and compete to begin to produce same, to catch up. So, what is more, there are not enough supercharger networks in the United States. To worsen matters, other electric cars could not recharge at Tesla's facilities until recently. They're beginning to change. Solar panels and batteries do not charge at night. We know that. This adds to the deficit of high costs, especially in poor nations. However, those deficiencies are hardly mentioned in mainstream Western media. It is like a wind farm works only when there is considerable wind. But this inadequacy is also not usually discussed. So you can imagine if we begin to rely on wind farms, there are only certain parts of Nigeria where this could work. Solar is something, the radiation intensity is also an issue. So certainly in parts of the southern part, you don't have enough to power solar. It's not that you can't at all. It is just that you don't have enough to make it economically viable. You can do in the rooftops and so on, but the big solar farms are more economical where the intensity is higher. So, a critical raw material used in the production of solar panels and batteries is lithium ion. It is a mineral like coal or crude oil. It is mined. The process of extracting it is environmentally hazardous as well. But this is not usually discussed. In Chile, where it is produced more than in any other country, nearby rivers have been polluted. Protests by the citizens against pollution have been met by brute force, by security agents, violating the rights and dignity of the people. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, DRC, where cobalt, copper, and lithium ion are produced massively, there are human rights abuses on an industrial scale. There is also child labor, in addition to other forms of labor exploitation. The beneficiaries are mostly Western multinationals. The DRC government, towards the end of April 2024, hired the services of a team of French lawyers to write to Apple Corporation, the American technology giant, accusing it of benefiting from illegal actions in the eastern part of its country, where lithium ion and copper are used in manufacture of electronic gadgets like our smartphones and solar panels, as well as batteries, where they are mined. Rebels are active, very much so, in those parts of DRC. You can imagine, because the big companies that rely on this hire rebels also to be part of the business. In New York State, where the government plans to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 40% by 2030 and by 85% by 2050 from the 1990 levels through solar and wind power, there have been protests against the conversion of farmlands to solar and wind farms. There have also been protests against the destruction of biodiversity and the habitat generally. And this is in America. The most difficult and controversial issue deliberated on at the Conference of Parties, popularly known as COP28, which held in Dubai from 30th November to December 13 last year, was the fate of fossil fuels. At the end of the deliberations, participants agreed on a shift that would happen in a quote, just, orderly, and equitable manner. No date or timeline was given. But it was provided that developing economies, particularly those that depend on fossil fuels, be assisted. In doing so, the level of development and poverty of each country will be taken into consideration. We are yet to see how this is going to happen. It'll be very interesting, wouldn't it? Much as the agreement and wording of the resolutions are considered a win-win for those who wanted an immediate ban on fossil fuels and those opposed to the idea completely, it is often wondered whether the participants could have taken a more realistic different position. The world needs environmental protection, but the world just cannot do without fossil fuel, at least for now. That's the bottom line. And that's what those who were campaigning for total elimination of fossil fuel in Europe discovered more recently. As the experience has demonstrated in just the last 2 years, the European nations that have been in the forefront for clean energy found themselves returning to coal-fired plants when their interests were threatened in the wake of the Russian invasion of Ukraine 2 years ago. The United States relies on fossil fuel substantially. China, India, Japan, Russia, and others still rely on these kinds of fuel. Only a handful of nations. Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes. Take it. Thank you. But there's no place to place it. So only a handful of nations like Greece, Spain, and Portugal have crossed the clean energy line. And the G7 meeting of ministers responsible for the environment, climate, and energy held in Turin this last April, it was agreed that coal plants would be phased out among these nations by 2035, but that the participants were realistic enough to provide that those which could not meet the target should be allowed to continue to use coal-fired plants on condition that it would not compromise their commitment on bringing down global warming to 1.5 degrees centigrade by 2030. So what some countries would do is to have the companies that are emitting a lot of carbon to buy carbon credit. For example, the big forests in the Amazon, they keep the forest and they sell the carbon. It's actually traded on the stock exchange in New York. I wish we would trade something like that here in Nigeria, because there we have a lot of forests. So it is unlikely that Japan can afford to stop using coal by 2035. Germany has set a 2030 deadline, but there is no guarantee it will make it. The G7 member nations that campaigned for the phasing out of coal plants by 2035 are those which have already abandoned coal plants or used them minimally. In other words, what the world saw at the recent G7 ministers meeting in Italy is self-interest everywhere and becoming the big elephant in the room. How do we go from this? So this fact should not be lost on us here in Nigeria and our government. The primary responsibility of every government is to its people, their welfare and their security. This point is worth reiterating because Nigeria seems to pay more attention to gas exports than the domestic gas market because of the prospects of huge foreign exchange earnings, which the country needs desperately. Gas producers naturally prefer to export their products because their domestic prices are regulated, subsidized, and perhaps sold at below world market in some cases, not in all cases. Besides, those who supply gas to privatized power generating companies are typically owed, especially those GENCOs, not happening in our geometric power, I must tell you, we pay our bills. The Trans-Sahara gas pipeline is being constructed with a pipeline measuring 46 to 56-inch gauge so that it can carry billions of cubic meters of natural gas from Nigeria to Europe through North Africa. One or two cynics have wondered in recent times how sustainable the project may be in the long run. This is because Europeans, as you know very well from what I've been talking about, are in the forefront and the vanguard of eliminating fossil fuel. So we have to ask ourselves, if they find alternative, will they buy our gas? By that time, we would have invested heavily on a huge pipeline. I think if you come close to any of the pipes, it's almost the height of an average human being. The way gas works is that you have to line pack the gas before anybody even uses it, which means the thousands of kilometers must be line packed. You can imagine how much gas that is before you even begin to sell the gas. So, as Nigeria plans to embark on massive export of natural gas, the country is facing severe gas shortages at home. When General Sani Abacha military regime intervened in Sierra Leone in the 1990s under the ECOWAS rubric to flush out the new military regime and restore democratic rule there, Nigeria was described by a section of the international community as a country that was exporting what it did not have, democracy, but importing what it ought to have in abundance, namely petroleum products. The description may well fit the gas sector today. Nigeria has more than 200 trillion cubic feet of untapped gas reserves. It is estimated that convertible gas is at least 139 trillion cubic feet. It is one of the world's leading countries in gas. Yet, there is not enough gas or even liquefied petroleum gas used in the kitchen. Even in Nigeria's liquefied natural gas company, that is Nigeria LNG, a major foreign earner for Nigeria that has guaranteed market, it has been operating at about 60% capacity on account of insufficient gas supply. But that company is doing very well. It's trying to build next train 7. But it needs the gas. And the gas is here. We have it. But it needs to come out from the ground. The petroleum companies supplying gas to power plants are in a tighter position because they are performing suboptimal. There are now longer periods of electricity blackouts throughout the country. This is despite the spirited effort of Nigerian National Petroleum Company Limited, the Ministry of Power and the Presidency, making a lot of effort. Matter of fact, just yesterday, I was very happy to hear that the President inaugurated 2 major gas projects in the country. One at Kwale and the other at Nnaji in Imo State. These are very positive steps. We need to have more and more of these so that we can change our direction. I believe, really, and frankly, that a state of emergency needs to be declared in the gas sector. The declaration will save the power sector and allow the government and the other stakeholders to address fundamental issues in the gas sector in a robust manner. The issues will include how to strike healthy balance between producing gas for export and gas for domestic consumption. Gas is equally needed in both markets. Now, another critical area in Nigeria's power sector is the transmission network. I believe that having the national grid the way we have it is still going to be a problem. First, it is not robust, it's not well structured. My advocacy is for multiple grids, semi-autonomous, but connected to the national grid, so that the national grid still operates and it's made more robust. It will begin to cure the regular incidents of failure of the network. When I was in government, we embarked on a project, or rather we actually got Federal Executive Council to approve what we call a super grid, a 765 kV network that will kind of ride above the existing 330 kV network. So right now Nigeria has 330 kV and 132 kV, but none of them really robust. But the 765 kV network would be very important to take power from power plants such as the Mambila that's been in the works for a while. Over 3,000 megawatts of power will come from Mambila. So the question is, which transmission infrastructure will take that power? Suppose that we finish it. Now, you need a super grid to take that power, and so that Nigeria has the ability to take power from various power plants and transmit to wherever we want it. Now, I am happy that the current Minister of Power, Chief Adebayo Adelab, is reviving this super grid. And I think we have to support him on that because it's a very important project. Our conception was that it would be done in sections by different companies so that it's not just one of these big elephant, white elephant projects that you give to one company and they just go and sit with it. The development of electric power sector has also been stalled for years because of the suspension of what we developed at that time called partial risk guarantee to support a power purchase agreement. A government that's buying power has to issue power purchase agreement to the producer of power, and that power purchase agreement must be guaranteed. You can issue sovereign guarantee, but in the case that we are talking about, we wanted to have partial risk guarantee supported by the World Bank and backstopped by Nigerian government. So we were able to do this, but only one project was completed on it. That is the Azora Edo project, 461 megawatt power plant, and then it was stopped 9 years ago. So the outcome is that for that period of time, Nigeria has not commissioned a government-sponsored power project. And you heard the president of Ghana, or president of Ghana, say that you need to be adding, he said over 12% of energy to your country year on year. Because if you're going to grow the economy, that's what you need. So, I mean, it is very clear. So if in 9 years we have not added, you can imagine. I can also tell you that because of that partial risk guarantee, at least 4 or 5 major projects had been fully developed but stopped. So I encourage the government to reawaken those projects. They are very important, very, very critical. So, I have talked here about major current developments in energy, industry, and international, as well as the local environments. It is self-evident that nations and commercial entities are guided principally by their interests, despite their strong pledges to fight the climate change with all their might and resources. Even environmentalists who fiercely insist that poor nations shut down their fossil fuel plants to save the earth. I call them tree huggers, but they would come with patriotic stand. They take patriotic stand when their country's interests are affected directly. For instance, Greenpeace Germany in August 2022 described Germany's decision to restore coal-fired plants as bitter but inevitable. So even in the unlikely event that rich nations win themselves off fossil fuel within the foreseeable future, the earth will continue to be polluted because most developing nations do not have the resources and technical know-how to transition yet to cleaner energy. Bangladesh, a nation of 170 million people, has been building new coal power plants, and the beneficiaries are not just local people and local businesses, but also big Western firms like Walmart of the United States and Zara of Spain. Developed countries and multilateral institutions need to assist developing countries with technology, human capital development, infrastructure, and finance to grapple with the basic challenges of development. After all, the climate crisis was unleashed by the rich nations. The point, this is very, very important. The poor nations are merely the victims. Countries like Nigeria have the responsibility to remind developed nations that much as natural gas is a fossil fuel, it is actually a transition fuel. Mr. President, transition fuel, not just merely fossil fuel. That's why they bandy it and tell you that it's part of fossil fuel, so you should go and stop fossil fuel. No. In fact, I will tell you, in Nigeria, I would say that for the next 20 to 30 years, we will continue to rely on natural gas for power production, provided that we go and invest in production of natural gas. So while the Nigerian government should be encouraged to explore more foreign markets for its resources like natural gas, sight should not be lost on the fact that charity should begin at home. In fact, an emergency, as I said, has to be declared in the domestic gas market to save the electric power sector and address other issues. The supergrid should be given priority to boost the nation's transmission infrastructure. The federal government has to resume signing power purchase agreements with appropriate guarantee instruments. The whole idea of partial risk guarantee is that it doesn't go on the balance sheet of government in the way just ordinary sovereign guarantee would. So it's a fraction of what it would have been that's in the books of government, given the credit rating of the country. So so that this will help us to experience proper economic prosperity and trajectory like other emerging nations such as the BRIC nations, Brazil, Russia, India, and China, or even the CIVETs. There is such. Colombia, Indonesia, Vietnam, Egypt, Turkey, and South Africa. We're not even in that one. I believe that we can achieve all of this if we apply the willpower as a nation and the right frame of mind to change the energy equation, just like the BRIC and the CIVET countries. It is up to us. Thank you very much.
I think that Professor Barth Nnaji deserves a standing ovation. Thank you. A standing ovation for him. It's not every day that you have the opportunity to listen